future brought to life in most video games is, if I'm being generous, usually pretty hopeless. But sometimes the dystopic worlds we play in offer experiences that are less thoughtful about the doom and gloom of the future, providing a super violent playground to cause havoc in instead. Huntdown is undeniably one of the latter, and although it may be as dumb as rocks, which I say with all due reverence, it's an incredibly fun time, especially if you love the particular brand of cult 80s films that the game is clearly influenced by. Huntdown is set in a dark and dangerous future where corporations might make the rules, but dangerous gangs rule the streets. In this world of corrupt and incompetent cops, players, in the role of ruthless bounty hunters, are the only force alive who can keep the city from falling apart, and it's up to them to hunt down its worst criminal scum. The story isn't complex by any means, but it does provide a city and characters that are full of personality, even if there isn't much depth to be found. For my money though, that personality was more than enough to keep me hooked, just so I could see what Huntdown had in store for me next. Much of this personality is conveyed through Huntdown's surprisingly detailed 16-bit art. The various gangs each have their own distinct themes, a la the Warriors, and all it takes is one look at the flame-spewing industrial skyline or the graffiti-covered back alleys to get a very Blade Runner Escape from New York kind of vibe. In particular though, I love the HUD art that shows your characters getting more damaged as you take hits. It's a neat, if ultimately unnecessary touch. The game's animations are similarly detailed and expressive, especially when it comes to Huntdown's cadre of boss criminals. You only get to spend a boss fight's length with most of these characters, but they manage to get their whole deal across in these relatively brief encounters, which are easily a highlight of the game. Also, the voice acting is great. It's hammy and super tongue-in-cheek, and though the writing itself may not be much on its own, the delivery ends up making the deluge of quips and one-liners pretty funny. Sitting in stark contrast to Huntdown's goofy voice work is a synth-heavy soundtrack that fits the grim, gritty, film-inspired setting perfectly, and it's a great mix. Admittedly, the music does sink comfortably into the background beneath the constant gunfire and explosions more often than not, but in Huntdown's odd moment of calm, it really does shine. Most of the tracks have a dark tone, and their thumping percussion in particular fits the high-impact action that the game is looking to deliver. And deliver it does. Huntdown isn't the deepest gameplay experience around, but goddamn it is a fun time. The game tasks you with taking out the city's most dangerous criminal threats, with each gang offering up 4 underbosses and a leader for you to enact ultra-violent justice upon via side-scrolling shooter action. It's a pretty straightforward gameplay premise, and the game's controls are similarly straightforward. You have an attack and a special attack, some basic movement options including ducking and jumping, and you're able to pick up new weapons and swap between them at will. Now, with such a basic set of controls, you might think that Huntdown would wear thin pretty quickly, but across its 20 or so stages, it manages to stay very entertaining. Even in the early levels, blasting away at criminals is super satisfying, and the inclusion of a cover system that automatically ducks you behind boxes or walls when you move up to them gives the game a little more depth than it initially appears to have. Instead of having you just run and gun your way through each level, plenty of encounters get turned into these timing challenges as you pop out of cover to take pot shots in between enemy fire. But the game doesn't just rely on this one mechanic to keep things interesting. Huntdown also has a slew of new weapons, special weapons, level gimmicks, and enemy types to keep players engaged for its duration. The variety of guns, melee weapons, and thrown weapons is super impressive, and you're usually presented with a decent selection at any given time, and while some weapons are clearly superior, like the various miniguns and rocket launchers, most weapons have some clear benefit to using them. These benefits range from rapid fire to ludicrous stopping power, and grabbing a new weapon can change the flow of an entire fight. This is doubly true of Huntdown's special thrown weapons. Whether you're after massive damage in the form of grenades, area denial in the form of molotovs, or the screen-clearing potential of cluster bombs, Huntdown has you covered. Even when you don't have one of these equipped though, each character gets their own unique thrown weapon that, while not as effective as the more explosive options, do a decent amount of damage in a pinch. The different characters also have their own unique main weapons, differing in rate of fire and overall power, but they feel pretty even at the end of the day. Now, weapon variety is nice and all, but would only do so much if Huntdown just threw you into a sequence of bland corridors with nothing to differentiate them. Thankfully, the game is constantly adding new level gimmicks to spice things up. Early stages might be content to leave you with the satisfying gunplay and cover system, but later levels start introducing stuff like conveyor belts and waist-high water to affect your movement, or they give you a heavier focus on platforming. A greater variety of enemies are introduced as you progress as well. Fast-moving vehicle enemies are just the beginning, as Huntdown eventually throws snipers, rocket soldiers, and dudes in jetpacks at you as well. The enemy varieties probably do the most to set each level apart too, if I'm being honest. There's something about how actively dodging sniper fire or running away from homing missiles changes the focus of the game from full-on offense to frantic defense that's really interesting. But as I said earlier, the highlight of the game, for me at least, was Huntdown's boss encounters. Once you've blasted your way through the legions of cannon fodder, you come face to face with the lieutenants of each gang to cap off every level, and these fights display a surprising amount of variety. At a glance, they're all pretty basic face-to-face showdowns, forcing you to run and gun your way around an arena while avoiding devastating attacks, but by using a good range of arena layouts and attack patterns, no two boss fights feel quite the same. One minute you could be dodging dumbbells being thrown at you by a roid-raging bodybuilder, the next you're jumping over some greaser who's charging at you on his hover bike. These boss fights can be the toughest part of the game, but that's not to say that the rest of Huntdown is a cakewalk. Even on its normal difficulty, the game can provide quite the challenge, with players only able to take 5 standard hits before taking a dirt nap. But it's not like Huntdown is ruthless about testing players' skills either. Health drops are pretty regular, and even the game's bosses have additional minions filtered in over time so you can farm them for health. But if the game isn't hard enough for you, then you also have secondary objectives to fulfill, which include killing a certain number of enemies, clearing a stage without dying, or collecting 3 stashes per level. That last objective in particular is neat because not only does it require you to scour each level, but some of these stashes are dropped by fleeing enemies, forcing you to rush into enemy territory and risk dying. Beyond these challenges though, Huntdown doesn't have a huge amount of inherent replayability. You unlock the badass difficulty by beating the game once, which is great if you're looking to test your skills, but doesn't really entice me to play the game over again. That lack of incentive to go back and replay the game is made worse by Huntdown's rather short runtime, coming in at between 4 and 6 hours, and the lack of online co-op is a bit of a bummer as well. Local options are all well and good, and Huntdown's chaotic action is even more fun with a bounty hunter buddy along for the ride, but it really is a shame that it doesn't offer any online options at all. At the end of the day, with Huntdown, you really are paying for quality over quantity. There's not a lot of game here, but in my opinion, Huntdown is certainly worth the cost of admission. With all that said, Huntdown is excellent. Though it's fairly short and doesn't offer much in the way of mechanical diversity, Huntdown does exactly what it sets out to do. Its action is frantic and satisfying, and with the game's range of weapons, sub-weapons, level gimmicks, and enemies, it managed to keep me hooked for the entire, admittedly short runtime. And I won't lie, I fully intend on jumping back into Huntdown from time to time, as its bite-sized levels are a perfect way to switch off your brain and get a quick fix of dumb fun. I highly recommend it. Huntdown is available on Nintendo Switch, Xbox One, PS4, and is currently available on the Epic Store for PC.